This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
My name is David Wardrop. I chair the Westminster branch of the United Nations Association, and we're very pleased here in this hall for the second time sharing an event with the Commonwealth Studies section of this university. And it's good to see familiar faces here too. We had a lot of fun deciding exactly the name of this conference, and it will remind me here, it was in the New York Times, Hanson Baldwin. Yesterday we clinched victory in the Pacific, but we sowed the whirlwind. And that explains the title. Also, listening to our speakers this morning, you can understand why Julian Huxley suggested that the proposed United Nations Educational and Cultural Organization should be changed to UNESCO, bringing in scientists, citing the impact of science on the outcome of the Second World War. And the preamble to the Constitution of UNESCO, that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defences of peace must be constructed. So in this particular session, we have two speakers representing or reflecting the work of, I want to say, society, the international community and the national communities as to how to reconcile this situation which our two speakers have introduced and how we got into this situation. They'll tell different stories. Andreas Persbo, our first speaker, has been watching states, how those with the bomb, without the bomb, address this particular topic, and the international institutions which have been set up by them, and lobbied and watched by NGOs such as his VERTIC. How do they see it up there? Bruce Kent comes from a different direction altogether, grassroots. The voice of Green and Common, Trafalgar Square, those who marched from Aldermaston and lobbied outside Faz Lane. Why is it, after all these years, 70 years, we're still in the same situation? The Iranian nuclear agreement is about 48 hours old. But at the same time, I saw in yesterday's paper that Dmitry Kiselyov, the Director General of one of the Russia Segonia news agency, said, standing in front of a large screen depicting a mushroom cloud produced by a nuclear explosion, that Russia is the only country in the world realistically capable of turning the United States into radioactive ash. So we have these jabs into our sense of fear that dare we let go of this nuclear capability. Both our speakers are experienced in their fields. Andreas, I had learned, he started in the UN peacekeeping forces in Lebanon and later in former Yugoslavia. Then the slippery slope, I suspect, Andreas. You worked for the Disarmament Affairs, UN Disarmament Affairs, and got involved in research on the 1996 ICJ advisory opinion on the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons. If you had done something different, you wouldn't have joined BASIC and then joined VERTIC, and here you are, some years later, in charge of that organization and the contact point with the International Atomic Agency. Bruce Kent is one of our paid-up members in the United Nations Association for his sins, and he joined the Christian campaign for nuclear disarmament, but later became General Secretary of CND itself, chair, and is now one of its vice presidents. During his officership in CND, membership grew from 2,000 to 100,000, and I wonder where they are now. He started since the movement for the abolition of war, and has been tireless, going up and down the country, talking to all types of community about the futility of the nuclear issue. The scrap Trident tour occupied his spring holiday, I know that. So two very different approaches as to how the wider community tries to make sense of the situation we got ourselves into. Andreas first.
Where do you want me?
From here.
Well, thank you, David. I don't think I've ever reflected on my own career that way, but it kind of makes sense. People sometimes ask me why I'm a multilateralist, and I suppose when the United Nations is where I started, and where I started the slippery slope, it's no great surprise. It really shouldn't be anyway. Thank you for inviting me, of course, and I think this is a very timely, or rather a very worthy topic of the United Nations Association in Westminster, because, of course, for someone who has once worked for the United Nations, this is hallowed ground. In 1946, in January, the newly established United Nations General Assembly met in this city, in the Methodist Central Hall, a little more than 30 minutes walk away from here. And of course, it was in that hall and by that assembly where the United Nations adopted its very first resolution. And that resolution was to establish a commission to deal with the problems raised by the discovery of atomic energy. In particular, the resolution asked for this commission to make specific proposals for, and I quote here, the elimination from national armaments of atomic weapons and all major weapons adaptable to mass destruction. Nothing much has happened since, you might say. For them, meeting in London so many years ago, their perspective on life was very different. When they exited the Great Hall, of course, London was very much scarred. Much of it was in ruin. I find it amazing that this great city where I live, and I've lived for 13 years now, actually did not recover until this year. 2015 was the year when London's population surpassed 1939. United Nations delegates would have been reminded of the consequences of war simply by walking out of the Great Hall. The continent itself lay in complete ruin. Europe was mourning 70 million dead in the Second World War, plus minus about 10 million, or the population of Sweden, that we just don't know. It's an uncertainty. It's so difficult for us today to even start to imagine those numbers and the grief that must have instilled in those delegates. I doubt also that many of these delegates would have foreseen what would be coming in the following decades. The 1950s and onwards is called the Great Acceleration by many, and the age we live in today is called the Anthropocene. Why is that? The world population doubled in only 50 years. The global economy has actually increased more than 15 times over since the 1950s. And the human enterprise, I think, has grown exponentially due to rising consumption, cheap and readily available energy, and liberal economic policies. We are increasingly connected, and we are fueled by an unsurpassed era of technological discovery. Anyone who tells you that the age of discovery is over, just tell them to watch TV and see the flyby of Pluto the other day, which is one of the most amazing things that we have done in the last decades. We are richer, healthier, better fed, better educated than ever before in the history of humanity. But this doesn't mean that the problems of our past have gone away. A decennium ago, H.G. Wells wrote In a World Set Free. He wrote it in 1914, or it was published in 1914. He wrote, all through the 19th and 20th centuries, the amount of energy that men were able to command was continually increasing. Applied to warfare, that meant that the power to inflict a blow, the power to destroy, was continually increasing. He concludes in a most sobering way, there was no increase whatever in the ability to escape. And I think this is the most chilling prediction of the nuclear age ever written. The responses to the Second World War, I think, was marvelous. An age of multilateralism, the founding of the United Nations, but also the founding of the European Union. In 1950, 5 years after the end of the war, French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman wrote, "World peace cannot be safeguarded without the making of creative efforts proportionate to the dangers which threaten it." And this very simple formulation laid the groundworks for the European Union. With that, we formed the European Coal and Steel Community, because as he thought, controlling the production of coal and steel, essential materials for the production of munitions, would make it, and I quote, "plain that any war between France and Germany becomes not merely unthinkable, but materially impossible." And I think, for one, that Robert Schuman's ideas presented then are as important today as it was then and applicable to nuclear disarmament. It too cannot be propelled without creative efforts proportionate to the challenge of getting to zero. But look at us. We're 30, maybe 40 people in this room. That is the strength of the creative effort today. Last year, the United Nations Secretary General, he said that one day all nuclear materials in weapons program must be subject to international verification. He called on all member states to begin the process to elaborate what he called effective arrangements. As quite a modest proposal coming so many years after the first resolution of the General Assembly, but that's what he said. And how to deal with nuclear disarmament issues has always been one of the most contentious issues at non-proliferation treaty review conferences. We know this. Non-nuclear weapon states have highlighted, as many of you are aware, the lack of progress on this article since 1975, and of course making this claim that not enough is being done is quite easy. It expends very little political capital. It relies on well-rehearsed arguments. So if you're lazy, you can just take the last few statements of the last 20 years or so and just repeat them. And it's part of what's expected at these conferences. Proposals that we hear in this conference tends to center on either end of the spectrum, where proponents of a nuclear weapons convention are clustered on one side of the debate, and proponents of a so-called step-by-step approach, saying that this is very difficult and it takes time, are clustered on the other side of the debate. And of course, this year, 2015, when delegates met in New York, we saw that very clearly. Practically oriented and constructive proposals on how to actually go forward, what an effective step are, they're rare, and this is pointed out by NGOs themselves, such as Reaching Critical Wills, which are, I would say, a campaign organization. The P5, they're making some concessions, they claim. They said, for instance, at the last preparatory committee in May 2014, the 5 nuclear weapon states submitted reports on the implementation of the treaty, including disarmament to date. And I think in part this stems from an increased emphasis on transparency that has emerged since the 2010 review conference, which was seen as a great success, but today in retrospect may not have been so successful after all. It also reflects, a conclave, a private meeting, a discussion amongst the nuclear weapon states called the P5 process, which are discussing transparency and verification. I leave you to reflect on whether a conclave can ever discuss transparency, but that's another thing. In these reports, nearly all the nuclear weapon states highlight the recognition of the importance of nuclear disarmament verification. UK says verification is a precondition for nuclear disarmament. China knows that it's been carrying out research into verification technologies, including monitoring technology and other things that could be applied to the task. And they've been doing this privately for the last 10 years. And of course, the United States announced last year and began now bringing it into action a disarmament verification initiative that they're doing together with an NGO called the well, it has an acronym that I still have to figure out actually. The Nuclear Initiative of the International Initiative of Nuclear Disarmament Verification or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's, they could have chosen a simpler acronym. Speaking at the PrepCon last year, the United States, they noted that it was working through this initiative and through their laboratories on effective verification methodologies and processes, and that its experience with arms control in the past have given it valuable experience, useful tools, etc., etc., etc. And to that end, said the United States, they were working closely with the other P5 states to lay the foundations for future arms control agreements with participants beyond Russia and the United States. Russia said that they are working in tandem with the United States to reduce and limit nuclear weapons and bring us close to the edge where engagement with all the states with military nuclear potential will be required. Non-proliferation treaty or non-proliferation treaty membership, non-membership alike. And of course, sometimes this sounds like, these governments and these representatives talking about a world that doesn't quite exist out there in the present international environment. And of course, no one says that if they ever come to an agreement to do deep reductions in nuclear weapons, no one says who should verify this multilaterally. Because possibly you could argue this is less important today at this stage when there are still some technical challenges to nuclear disarmament verification, and these need to be resolved. But on the other hand, I find it quite remarkable that no one really says it is obvious to us that in the future world, when we're multilaterally disarming, a multilateral organization should do this. So we've been working for the last 5 years or so to explore and try to build up a role for the International Atomic Energy Agency in disarmament verification, because it is the logical progression. What do member states say about that? Is there willingness amongst member states to allow the IAEA as an organization that many see as just dealing with non-proliferation, with Iran, with hard issues of arms control, to look into disarmament verification? You might be surprised, there are many non-nuclear weapon states that doesn't think that this is a suitable task for the organization. But it appears like there is an increased openness to talk about the multilateral aspect, to consider the suitability of the IAEA. The annual safeguards resolution is one of these obscure little documents that very few has heard of, that the General Conference adopts every year. But if you want to get a feeling for where the agency membership stands on this, and it is important to know where they stand on this, because you have Israel, India, and Pakistan being members there too. You will see that, in trickles, a little bit of disarmament recognition, just a little bit, but some. It started in 2011 when Brazil asked for an amendment to this resolution to note that, and I quote, "in furthering the establishment of safeguarded worldwide disarmament," this quotes from the agency statute, "non-proliferation and disarmament efforts, including nuclear verification, are mutually reinforcing." So the language was introduced as an attempt to ensure the withdrawal of objections on a wide range of other paragraphs, because the Iran deal and the Iran matter has caused so much friction within the IAEA about how they do their work on safeguards that it's virtually impossible today to negotiate this resolution. So by introducing disarmament language, the Brazilians hoped that they would diffuse some of the non-aligned, who would then come in and support other things. It's an old diplomatic trick. But it's the reaction to this that is interesting. So the United Kingdom, for instance, said, not a bad idea, we're willing to consider this in isolation. The Russian Federation and the United States, they said it was introduced too late in the process to really be thought of seriously, and this is also the standard diplomatic trick, but they did not dismiss it as unacceptable. So in 2011, since the Brazilians didn't know whether or not this language would pass, the General Conference ultimately never saw it and never resolved the matter. But it didn't disappear that, because starting in 2012, the language was reintroduced again. And for the past 3 years, the Safeguards Resolution contains a preamble paragraph that welcomes the work the agency has undertaken in verifying nuclear materials from dismantled nuclear weapons. So there is some recognition there, and I think that is important to note. It's one of the few bright sides I see today. Because it makes sense for the agency to talk about this, I think. It's the only forum where both the jure and de facto nuclear weapon states come together under one roof. And they share that roof with many quite capable non-nuclear weapon states that can contribute very effectively to verification challenges and verification thinking. Indeed, the 2010 NPT Review Conference, however you view it as an enabler or a problem, actually asked all the member states to be better in contributing and involve itself in a broader way in verification work. And it all culminated, I think, in the draft language that we saw in the 2015 NPT Review Conference. Us sitting at VERTIC, we obviously looked very carefully at all the verification provisions and we let other worry about other things. And we did see that for the first time ever, did the NPT membership call for a role of the International Atomic Energy Agency in disarmament verification. So multilateralism seems to have been reintroduced in our mind into this multilateral venue. Now, of course, we didn't get the final document at the end of the day, and we're going to talk about that, I suppose, at the panel later on today. And I will say this again later on, but I mean, I found it quite remarkable when I watched the live feed from New York late that Friday evening, that when they took the floor, most states that objected over the Middle East, and most states, including the non-aligned, which Iran spoke on behalf for, accepted the disarmament language. They said it's not perfect, but it's acceptable to us. I think it's a great shame that at the end of the day we couldn't get that language down on paper, that we couldn't use this now. People like myself and others can use it now to really show member states, look, this is what you're committed to do. So for the next 5 years, we're kind of lost. We'll have to find our own way. But it means that, that document still can be used, even if it's not adopted, as kind of a template for the work going to 2020. And this, I think, is good, simply because it so strongly reaffirms the principles of multilateralism. I doubt you hear that from many others, but I said it today. And I think that concludes my talk.
Thank you very much.